In earlier session, we have discussed about business research as a systematic and organized effort to investigate a specific problem encountered in the work setting. Indeed, if you look at the managers have to be alert and responsive to what is going on both within the organization and in its environment in order to take effective decisions and develop effective courses of action. The origin of most research stems from the desire to get a grip on issues, concerns, and conflicts within the company or in its environment. In other words, the research typically begins with a problem. So in that context, let's look at the learning objectives of this session. What we are going to talk about is identify the problem areas that are likely to be studied in organizations, and also we will be discussing about narrow down a broad problem into a feasible topic for research using preliminary research, and also to develop a good problem statement, and also we will be discussing about develop a set of hypotheses to be set. So next, let's talk about the broad problem area. So what we are going to learn about, see, a problem does not necessarily mean that something is seriously wrong with the current situation that needs to be rectified immediately. So a problem could also indicate an interest in an issue where finding the right answer might help to improve an existing situation. Thus, it is fruitful to define a problem as any situation where a gap exists between an actual and a desired ideal state. So if you look at this, if you look at the areas like problem currently existing in an organization setting that need to be solved, and you have a framework here. One is job freedom, and salary will lead to job satisfaction. We look into detail and we will try to understand more about the broad problem area has to be understood in an organizational context. For example, I can give you more examples on this context. So let's talk about the second problem area. I may talk about the areas that managers believes need to be improved in the organization. That may be the broad problem area, and also a conceptual or theoretical issues that needs to be tightened up for the basic researcher to understand certain phenomena. That is also a broad problem area, and some research questions that a basic researcher want to answer empirically. So that is very much required in addressing this broad problem area. So moving further, let's talk about some of the examples of broad problem areas that could be observed at the workplace. For example, training programs are perhaps not as effective as intimated. The sales volume of your product is not picking up. So that may be a broad problem area. It has to be explored and find out a solution for that. And also, inventory control is not effective. So what are the factors responsible for controlling the inventory? That has to be explored. And some members in organizations are not advancing in their careers. That could be, an example of a broad problem area. And also, when you look at the introduction of flexible work hours has created more problems than it has to be solved in many companies. So that's a great example for making you understand about the broad problem area. So in order to, address this problem area, we need to initially go with preliminary data collections. Because we need to really know the reasons what happened what are the causes of that particular problem. So the nature of data to be gathered pertaining to the problem could be classified under three headings. One is basically the background information of the organization. I mean the contextual factors pertaining to that problem area, and also the prevailing knowledge on the topic, earlier research, secondary research, different research reports already conducted, specific to the problem. So relevant findings from the previous research has to be reviewed so that we can able to get an idea about the problem by doing preliminary data collection. And moving further, the background details of the company can be obtained from available published records, website of the company, and many more reports prevailing in the company. And also by reading through the company, going through the company policies, procedures, and rules can be obtained from the organization's records and documents. And also you can look into, in order to address the broad problem area, you can also do a kind of data gathered through mostly through existing data. I mean the already collected data, which we call it as secondary data, right? So this exercise will make the researcher understand and gives a lot of clues about the problem area. So secondary data, or data that already exist and do not have to be collected by the researcher. It is already collected data, as I said earlier. And some secondary sources of data are statistical bulletins, I mean government publications, information published or unpublished and available from either within or outside the organization, and also from library records, data available from previous research, online data, website and other internet. And of course, we in Shastra, we have a huge database having ProQuest, EBSCO, Emerald, so many data base. We have a lot of access to online data, so that will give us an idea before we make an understanding about the problem area. So next one is let's talk about the next aspect that we call it as the other types of information, such as the perception and attitudes of the employees, are best obtained by talking to them, by observing the events, and also you can do an observation on the what you call the people and objects, or also you can do observation by or you can collect information by administering questionnaires to the specific employees, I mean the individuals who are the respondent of the problem area. Such data gathered for research from the actual site of occurrence of events are called primary data. This is really going to add value to your research. And the next one is like prevailing knowledge on the topic. So in order to this exercise we are basically doing in order to get fundamental clarity on the problem area. So as part of this exercise to understand the problem, we need to do a literature review. Should help the researcher to identify and highlight the important variables that are related to the problem. Do you understand this? For example, I can quote like, when a restaurant faces a lot of service quality problem, then what happens? You can collect literature pertaining to service quality. And I think I tell you that Parasuraman, Zaitmal and Berry in the year 1988, he has comprehensively developed an instrument which really talks about the service quality aspects. That instruments can be used very well in order to explore. I mean, you're supposed to review those articles so that this earlier article, I mean the literature review, will give you greater insight to understand the problem called service quality pertaining to restaurants. Okay, like that, so it is very important for any researchers in order to get fundamental clarity on their problem area. They're supposed to do a comprehensive literature survey, which is the documentation of a comprehensive review of the published and unpublished work from secondary sources of data in the areas of specific interest to the researcher. So that is very, very important. As a researcher, they're supposed to do that. It is very important for them to do the research. Next one is, let's talk about data sources. So as part of the literature review exercise, the researcher can avail a lot of, he can refer to various data sources such as textbooks, academic and professional journals, PhD theses and master theses, and also conference proceedings and unpublished manuscripts and reports, newspaper and internet sources. And there are various databases I was mentioning, ProQuest, EBSCO, Emerald. All that will give you a great idea in social science to understand a specific problem. So after gaining a great insight can be gained using this example. Okay. So basically here, if you look at this one, hold on please. So through this literature exercise, so we can get the greater insight can be gained. And also, if you look at that, the literature review introduced the subject of the study for the researcher. And also the literature review will highlight the problem that we do not have a good conceptual framework for understanding the problem area. And also, if you look at the literature review, which will help us to summarize the work done so far on the topic, so that we can able to explore the lacuna, the research gap, by reviewing the past research work. And it can be reported by having an APA citations, by reporting the citations in the body of the research, by mentioning the family names and the year of publication. All that we have a format given by American Psychological Association that can be used for citation purpose. You can Google, and you can get the format APA citations. And next one is, let's talk about defining the problem statement. After the literature review, the researcher is in a position to narrow down the problem from its original broad base and define the issues of concern more clearly. So that's the purpose of articulating the problem statement. And what makes, if you ask me what makes a good problem statement, the problem statement introduces the key problem statement, right? That is addresses in the research project. Problem statement should be very clear, precise, and short statement of specific issues that a researcher wishes to investigate. So that is going to be a good problem statement. And next, there are 3 criteria for a problem statement. As a researcher has to abide by these 3 criteria. If you look at that, because that will enhance the quality of the problem statement. So if you look at the problem statement, it should be relevant, it should be feasible, and of course, it should be also interesting. So from an academic perspective, research is relevant if nothing is known about the topic, much is known about the topic, but the knowledge is scattered. Much research on the topic is available, but the results are contradictory. Established relationship do not hold in certain situations. On these perspective, right, I think the literature review will give you a great answer towards the problem area. And a problem statement, when we say it is feasible, it means that if you are able to answer the problem statement within the restrictions of the research project, these restrictions are possibly related to time and money and the expertise of the researcher. A problem statement may be too difficult to answer. So if you look at that, it is important that you develop a narrowly defined question that can be investigated with a reasonable amount of time and effort. So then we can claim that the problem statement is feasible. Next one is when the problem statement will be interesting, because research is a time-consuming process, we all know. Am I right? If you will go through many ups and downs during the process of research, so before you present a final version of your research report, it is therefore vital for a researcher, the reader of the research, that you are interested in the problem statement. You make sure the reader is interested in the problem statement that you are trying to answer. So you can stay motivated throughout the entire process. That's the way your problem statement has to be refined and articulated. Next one is, I can quote an example of broad problem areas that a manager could observe at the workplace. So we can talk about training programs are not as effective as anticipated. The sales volume of a product is not picking up. These are the examples I already given and discussed with you in this session. The newly installed information system is not being used by the managers for whom it was primarily designed. The introduction of flexible work hours has created more problems than it has solved in many companies. So we'll take more examples on the well-defined problem statement. So before we try to quote examples to what extent we need to make sure these key points has to be addressed. To what extent do the structure of the organization and the type of information system installed account for the variance in the perceived effectiveness of managerial decision making. So this is one example we can take it for our learning purpose. To what extent has a new advertising campaign be successful in creating high quality customer centered corporate image that it was intended to produce? So this is in the business and marketing context. I have quoted an example of a well-defined problem statement. At the same time, how has the new package affected the sales of the product? And what are the effects of downsizing on the long-range growth patterns of the company? So I think these are the great examples to make you understand what is a problem statement. So the foregoing problems provide us with enough information to embark on our research journey. However, what these problems also have in common is that they still have to be transformed into a researchable topic. That's very, very important. And next one is, indeed, once we have identified the management problem, it needs to be narrowed down to a researchable topic for the study. Very often, much work is needed to translate the, broad problem into a feasible research topic. So that's very important. And moving further, what makes a good problem statement? A good problem statement includes both a statement of research objective and the research question. So this is very, very important. Whenever you try to, develop your problem statement, whenever you present your problem statement. So I have explained that good research has a purposive focus, whereas the purpose of fundamental, or basic research in business is related to expanding knowledge of business and management in general. The ultimate aim of applied research is often to change something in order to solve a specific problem encountered in the work settings. So as a researcher, you have to be very keen about developing a research objective and a research question which will give you and give you a great idea about the problem area to be explored. Next one is I have shown you some of the examples of the research objective. So that has to be really addressed to make you clear about what is about what is really you should know about developing a research objective. So when you talk about the research objective, there are many things that you're supposed to understand. That is, once the purpose of the study has been identified, one is able to formulate the research questions of the study. The inclusion of one or more research questions in the problem statement further clarifies the issues to be resolved. The research questions specify what you want to learn about the topic, But, before we develop a research question, it is always we need to be, developing a good research objectives. So, for example, let's talk about this. Take this example, like to find out what motivates consumer to buy a product online, to study the effect of leadership style on employees' job satisfaction, and to investigate the relationship between capital structure and profitability. To investigate the relationship between capital structure and profitability of the firm. And next, examples for research objective: to establish factors regarding the adoption and use of information system, and also to determine the optimal price for a product, and also to investigate the influence of the in-store shopping environment on impulse buying, to establish the determinants of employee involvement, and to understand the causes of employee absence. So I think these examples will make you understand how to, develop your research objective pertaining to the problem statement. And there are many things we need to understand from research objective. We need to develop a research question, and there are many types of research questions. First, we start with the exploratory research question. So let's understand what is exploratory research questions. And talking about exploratory research questions are typically developed when not much is known about a particular phenomenon, and also existing research results are unclear or suffer from serious limitations. If you find like the topic is highly complex, then you can go for exploratory research question. And these are the situations whereby you can use exploratory research questions. There is not enough theory available to guide the development of a theoretical framework. And we all know that exploratory research is all about, mostly it relies on qualitative approaches to data gathering, such as informal discussions with consumers, employees, managers, through interviews, focus groups, and case studies. As a rule, the exploratory research is flexible in nature. Indeed, the activities of the researcher in exploratory research are quite similar to the activities of the of the researcher. And to make you understand about exploratory research, I have quoted a lot of examples here, like what is an exploratory research, on what context an exploratory research questions can be posed, And moving further to the next type of research question, it is called descriptive research question. So what is descriptive research question? The objective of descriptive research question is to obtain data that describes the topic of interest. For instance, if you want to know what percentage of the population likes Coca-Cola better than Pepsi in a double-blind test, we are interested in describing consumers' taste preference. I think hope you with this example you guys understand what is descriptive research, and I can also give you more clarity on descriptive research. Descriptive studies are often designed to collect data that describe characteristics of objects such as, for example, persons, organizations, products, or brands, and events or situation maybe. So descriptive research is either quantitative or qualitative in nature. It may, involve the collection of quantitative data such as satisfaction ratings, production figures, sales figures, or demographic data. I think you might have come across these contexts. But it may also entail the collection of qualitative information. For instance, qualitative data might be gathered to describe how consumers go through a decision-making process, or to examine how managers resolve conflicts in organization. In all these contexts, we may use a descriptive research question. I think with this example, I'm sure that you are very clear about in understanding what is descriptive research question. And next one is the last type of research question. It is called, it depends upon the research context. We have to be sure about the research context and the requirement. And if you look at this casual research question, see when the casual research test whether or not one variable causes another variable to change. In a causal study, the researcher is interested in delineating one or more factors that are causing a problem. Typical examples of causal research questions are: what is the effect of a reward system on productivity? I repeat again, what is the effect of a reward system on productivity? And how does perceived value affect consumer purchase intention? I think this is a great example of causal study. The intention of the researcher conducting a causal study is to able to state that the variable X causes variable Y. So when variable X is removed or altered in some way, problem Y is solved. So that's the explanation I would like to give you to make you understand about causal research questions. And here in causal research, the independent and dependent variable should co-vary. That is very, very important. And also the independent variable, the presumed causal factor should precede the dependent variable. That's the condition for causal research questions. No other factor should be possible cause of the change in the dependent variable. A logical explanation is needed, and it must explain why the independent variable affects the dependent variable. So that is the conditions has to be used while writing your causal research question. So the next one is, I think this example is a great example you can talk about. You can see here, let's talk about the problem. The problem here, I can read you. Frequent and long delays may translate into much frustration among airline passengers, to switching behavior and to negative word of mouth communication. These feelings and behaviors eventually have negative effects on the performance and the profitability of the firm, isn't it? Am I right? So this is the problem, and the problem has been well defined here in case of the airline company. And what is the problems has been very well we have put it here for your better understanding. And following the problem, one of the component elements, there are two elements you need to address in order to address the problem area, that is research objective and research question. So let's, in pertaining to this problem, let us see the research objective. So the purpose of the study is twofold. So first one is to identify the factors that influence the passengers' waiting experience, and also to investigate the possible impact of waiting on customer satisfaction and service evaluations. So this is the way we try to write the research objective pertaining to the problem what we have discussed just now. And also when you talk about the research question, so pertaining to the research objective, that should be a correlation between research objective and research question. So the context should not change. That's very important whenever you develop a research question. So let me read out, what are the factors that affect the perceived waiting experience of airline passengers, and to what extent do these factors affect the perception of waiting times? I think it is very clearly written. The research questions has been very clearly written, and I think with this hope you will be certainly understanding how to write a problem statement. And the next research questions pertaining to the research objective and the problem here is, what are the affective consequences of waiting, and how does affect mediate the relationship between waiting and service evaluations? So how do situational variables such as filter time influence customer reactions to the waiting experience? So that is very, very important. So I think with this input, I have made you clear about how a business problem getting translated into a problem statement. And there are two elements involved in articulating a problem statement. One is the research objective. The next one is the research question. So let's also talk about the definition of an hypothesis. So what is the definition of an hypothesis? Let us look at the definition of the hypothesis. A hypothesis can be defined as a tentative yet testable statement which predicts what you expect to find in your empirical data. Hypotheses are derived from the theory on which your conceptual model is based, and often relational in nature. Okay, so along these lines, hypotheses can be defined as logically conjectured relationship between two or more variables expressed in the form of testable statements. By testing the hypothesis and confirming the conjectured relationship, it is the expected solutions can be found to correct the problem encountered. So going in detail about hypothesis, let's also talk about more contextual examples here before we move further. As I mentioned, some of the important criteria required for developing a hypothesis. Once we have, in research, we identify the important variables pertaining to a situation which is going to address the problem area, and we try to, establish the relationship among them through logical reasoning in the theoretical framework. We are in a position to test whether the relationship that have been theoretically developed, in fact, hold true or not, which we are trying to test here. So by testing these relationships scientifically through appropriate statistical analysis or through negative case analysis in qualitative research, we are able to obtain actually reliable information on what kind of relationship exists among the variables operating in the problem situation. The results of these tests offer us some clues as to what could be changed in the situation to solve the problem. So basically here formulating such a testable statement is called hypothesis development. So let's take some of the examples of hypothesis statement. Workforce diversity has positive effect on organizational effectiveness. There are two variables we have taken. One is workforce diversity here, and also we have taken organizational effectiveness, and we are trying to test the relationship between these two variables. So that is called hypothesis, and it can be used by some Pearson correlation analysis statistical tool, and we can develop alternative and null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis to test this hypothesis. Next one is the statement of hypothesis format has various types. Hypothesis can be defined as a testable statement of the relationship of among variables. I was mentioning repeatedly on this statement. So let me give you an example. Young women will be more likely to express dissatisfaction with their body weight when they are more frequently exposed to images of thin models in advertisement. If young women are more frequently exposed to images of thin models in advertisement, then they will be more likely to express dissatisfaction with their body weight. So that's a great example I would like to give on this hypothesis statement. And in hypothesis statement, we have different types. As I said, we have a directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. So what is directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis? If in stating the relationship between two variables or comparing two groups or terms such as positive, negative, more than, less than, and the like are used, then these are called directional hypothesis, because what happened here, the direction of the relationship between the variables, the positive relationship or negative relationship, is very well indicated. So that's why we call it as a directional hypothesis. As in the first, we can see this example given here. The nature of the difference between two groups on a variable, more than or less than, is postulated, so that you can see here. And on the other hand, we have a non-directional hypothesis. So what is a non-directional hypothesis? Non-directional hypotheses are those that do postulate relationship or difference, but offer no indication of the direction of these relationships or differences. So in other words, I can say that though it may be conjectured that there is a significant relationship between two variables, we may not be able to say whether the relationship is positive or negative. As in the example, the first example, the greater the stress experienced in the job, the lower the job satisfaction of the employees. Likewise, even if we can conjecture that there will be a difference between two groups on a particular variable, we may not be able to say which group will be more and which is less on that variable. Okay, you can look at this second example. That is, women are more motivated than men. I think so. Non-directional hypotheses are formulated either because the relationship or the difference have never been explored, and hence there is no basis for indicating the direction, or because there have been conflicting findings in previous research studies on the variables. In some studies, a positive relationship might have been found, while in others, a negative relationship might have been traced. Hence, the researcher might only be able to hypothesize that there is a significant relationship, but the direction may not be clear. So in such cases, the hypothesis can be stated as non-directional hypothesis. It's stated in a non-directional way. So note that in the first example, there is no clues as to whether arousal-seeking tendency and preference for complex the greater the stress experienced in the job, the lower the job satisfaction of employee. So I think this inputs from my end makes you clear about what is directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. And the next type of hypothesis, we call it as, I think this is the example, there is a relationship between arousal-seeking tendency and consumer preference for complex product design. There is a difference between the work ethic value of American and Asian employee. So this example makes you clear what is non-directional hypothesis, as we all discussed that really this hypothesis postulate a relationship or difference, but offer no indication of the direction of these relationship or differences. The next one is, let's talk about null and alternative hypothesis. So what is null and alternative hypothesis? When you talk about the hypothetico-deductive method, requires that hypotheses are falsifiable. They must be written in such a way that other researchers can show them to be false. For this reason, hypotheses are sometimes accompanied by null hypothesis. A null hypothesis, it is denoted by H0, is a hypothesis set up to be rejected in order to support an alternative hypothesis labeled as HA when used. And the null hypothesis is presumed true until statistical evidence in the form of hypothesis test. For instance, I can talk about the null hypothesis may state that advertising does not, I can quote an example like advertising does not affect sales that women and men buy equal amounts of shoes. In more general terms, the null hypothesis may state that the correlation between two variables is equal to 0, or that the difference in the means of the two groups in the population is equal to 0. Typically, the null statement is expressed in terms there being no significant relationship between two variables or no significant difference between two groups. And coming back to the alternative hypothesis, the alternative hypothesis, which is the opposite of null, is a statement expressing the relationship between two variables or indicating difference between two groups, right? So I can explain you further. In setting up the null hypothesis, we are stating that there is no difference between what we might find in the population characteristics, that is the total group we are interested in knowing something about, and the sample we are studying, that is a limited number of representative of the total population or a group that we have chosen to study. Since we do not know the true state of affairs in the population, all we can do is to draw inferences based on what we find in our sample. what we simply through the null hypothesis is that any differences found between two sample groups or any relationship found between two variables based on our sample or simply due to the random sampling fluctuation and not due to any two true differences between the two population groups, say men and women, or relationship between two variables, say sales and profit. So the null hypothesis thus formulated, it can be tested for possible rejections. So if we reject the null hypothesis, then all permissible alternative hypotheses relating to the particular relationship tested could be supported. It is the theory that allows us to have faith in the alternative hypothesis that is generated in particular research investigation. This is one more reason why theoretical framework should be grounded on sound, defendable logic to start with. Otherwise, the researcher are likely to refute and postulate other defensible explanation through different alternative hypotheses. Okay, so through this input, I think you guys understand what is directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis, null hypothesis, and alternative hypothesis. And there are certain steps to be followed in hypothesis testing. The first one is state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis very clearly, and which is related to your conceptual theoretical framework, and it should relate with your problem statement, research question, and research objectives. And choose the appropriate statistical test depending on whether the data collected are parametric or non-parametric. That is very important. And determine the level of significance desired. That is P is equal to 0.05 or more or less, depending upon your research inputs and data. See if the output results from the computer analysis indicate that the significance level is met. And think we will be demonstrating this hypothesis inference writing during our SPSS input. Okay, hope you all very clear with how to develop a problem statement and what are the components of a problem statement. I mean the research questions and research objectives, and how to develop an hypothesis based on the literature review that we have discussed in this session. I think please go through this video and all my study materials, and also try to explore Google and YouTube pertaining to this topic. And I think self-learning is a great exercise whereby you can get fundamental clarity. Hope you all enjoyed my session. Thank you.